Hello there, you are listening to The Screen Queen, where you'll be finding your favorite movie or your favorite television show and learning something new. You'll just have to listen to find out. Here is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there and welcome back to the show. As always, and last time I checked, my name is Sammy Parrish and you were listening to your host on the East Coast that brings the most, The Screen Queen. So, Invader Zim was a bit of a rebel in his time, wasn't he? I mean, you can't not have a rebel coming through the lines. I mean, how we lost one last week. God rest in peace, Ozzy. But it's not the first time that we've had a rebel. Every decade, we get someone that wants to break the mold. First, we had someone like Ralph Bakshi that came through in the 70s with his work. And then you had the 80s doing what the 80s does best. But then when it came time for the new millennium, what was going to be that rebel? That rebel came in the shape and form of a little dumb green alien that just keeps trying to take over the world. And instead, he took over our hearts. So funny enough, when John Vasquez sought out to make Invader Zim, he wasn't set on this being a kid's show. This was just going to be a stupid story about stupid characters that do stupid things, and you have a good time with it all. And there was no arguments on that point. Except on the network side of it, Invader Zim went through a lot in its 2-season run, being against two big dogs like the Fairly Odd Parents and SpongeBob SquarePants. Those were the three big dogs back then in Nickelodeon. And it's aged the best out of all of them. Think about that. A show with 2 seasons and a majorly needed Netflix movie did better than a show that had a Jimmy Hoffa style like cancellation send-off. And another one that, well, he still lives in a pineapple under the sea, probably for the rest of our time. Invader Zim was a much needed, crazy, chaotic palate cleanser to go into the new millennium. And now that it's been almost 25 years since Invader Zim has graced the screens with his chaos, now is the time to talk about how that 20 years has done in time. And oh boy, the information that y'all are about to find out you might not be ready for. So, in preparation, let's sing the doom song and get into Invader Zim. Or should I say, Zim! Okay, that hurt my throat. Let's go. So my first introduction to Invader Zim was back in the days of Nickelodeon, where they used to have these things called bumpers. And that kind of makes me feel old to have to say that. But when there was a transition in a network that was going to be towards like a program, you know, like with Toonami or Adult Swim, you can tell the shift is happening. The shift in Nickelodeon was a commercial where you have this like 1950s woman who's making a really lovely dinner. And then when you know it, this kid in a skateboard comes colliding on the picture and paint goes flying everywhere. And my 7-year-old ass was like, you have my attention. You could tell it was the guy time. But since I was the kid that grew up with action animes like Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball Z, and watching things like Batman, I was like, speaking my language, go on. And whenever they had the guy time on Nickelodeon, it was Invader Zim, and then they'd have like Rocket Power. They always chose the dude things. And that was how I got introduced to Invader Zim. So when Invader Zim first graced the screens, it was the first show of John Vasquez, and I hope I have been pronouncing his name right. Please let me know if I'm not. Anyway, he did not decide to be an animator. He was a comic book artist that was known for a little thing called Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. There are a lot of people that are big fans of Invader Zim, and you can't not know about Invader Zim without Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, because it basically tells you everything you need to know about watching Invader Zim. When it comes to creators, you can always tell what their storytelling is going to be like. Look at something like Ed, and Eddie. You know, another guy that also, definitely feels like he should be bowling buddies with the creator of Invader Zim. What Danny Bonaducci did was a book about a cannibal, and then would go on to go make Ed, and Eddie on a Dare. But you can definitely tell this man has dipped his toes into horror because those kids definitely look messed up. Then you look at Invader Zim and look at its previous work and see how the chaos makes sense. So I'm going to share a panel that I was told about from Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. Now I have to give a content warning because this is a graphic thing that I'm going to share. So there's a part in the comic where Johnny walks into what is a restaurant and he ends up beheading someone in the area, and then everyone is just like numb, shocked, not doing anything about it completely, and they just brush off like nothing ever happened. That's your environment. Now look at Invader Zim. This guy stole organs from kids. No one did anything about it. A kid got their eyeballs replaced by something else. Nothing else happened about it. You're in an environment that welcomes the chaos and then just keeps moving forward. It's not a show for everybody. There are some people that like morbidity, and there are some people that just don't. This is one that marries morbidity with a mean-spirited, dark sense of humor. And it's beautiful, it goes together, but it doesn't go with everybody, and that's okay. But when you put the pieces together, like I said, it makes a lot more sense. But that's also where the complaints came through about Invader Zim, saying that it was too frightening and too violent. Honestly, it's like a diet version of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. It still has its mean-spiritedness. It still has an action-y, cartoon-style violence to itself, appropriate for its own environment. It's desensitized while also not being too desensitized. And like I said, this is a show that had to be treated that if you can accept its environment, then go forward. And once you get into Zim, you learn very quickly if this is the show for you. And a lot of kids willingly put themselves through it to know what their threshold is. And that's why a lot of people can say if they like Zim or not. But it's a weird enough environment to let you know from the get-go if you want to jump ship. There were so many children in test screenings that were trying so hard not to be scared of Zim and couldn't fess up that it just... But then there was the complaint that Zim was too frightening. And as it is accurate that there are some frightening moments, I would say they're more spooky. But for the time period being in the end of the 90s, going into the new millennium, when TV was still changing and we could test to see what would be too much or not enough, or just flat out disqualified, many people felt that Zim was too much and that it shouldn't be shown to children. And there were some episodes that I'll admit probably could have used a warning at the time, like the infamous organ harvest episode. Unfortunately, a lot of children back then during the test screenings were so terrified they wet their seats. It was just like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs all over again. Like when you see peril and danger, like you're going to react to peril and danger. But there were some kids that could handle it. If you get the joke that it's a very alien idea that an alien's going to overcompensate to get more organs, it's great. But you get these kids that realize organs are being taken from other children. Yeah, Zim just became one of those lessons we would eventually learn about putting up warning labels and being able to still enjoy a show even if it has one moment, but that doesn't mean that one moment derails everything. But back then, Zim was treated that every moment that it did was tested like it was its last because of how much of a risk it was. But if anything, it was a calculated risk. John and Vasquez made something that you have to not be offended by everything. He really fought for a show to be created where you can't be offended. Because why would you want to be offended by something like Zim? And people were wasting their own energy attacking this creator almost on like a weekly basis. Like, it's too violent, it's too frightening. And he's like, well, this wasn't a show meant for kids. Like, that's why it exists and it's portrayed the way it is. And people just weren't really getting it. But we all knew that being children of the millennial age, that there is no way for something to just be accepted. And then you have someone like Mr. Vasquez that made sure there was a fight for the weird to not just be called offensive or too much or needing to change things. Like, it was nice to have a show existed that you didn't have to learn a lesson. You didn't have to know how to share. You got to watch things blow up and see a robot do weird things and all these fantastical alien elements that you get to see from other sci-fi shows, and you got what was like the Nickelodeon version of all of that. There's been a comparison made to Invader Zim that it feels a lot like Third Rock from the Sun, which, as someone who absolutely loves that show and quotes it till the end of my dying days, I can see that. The premise of an alien that should be a being beyond our comprehension and has intelligence beyond our means, and we don't have that here. He's literally stupefied by everything, and it comes off in a naivete like no one else does the things that he does, and then tries to overcompensate. They're very alien ideas because he's trying so hard to fit in, much like Dick Solomon and the crew were trying to fit in. Now, with Invader Zim being kind of known as a controversial show, it seemed like everything that was being thrown towards this show was doing whatever it could to derail it. But there was one issue that did have to be addressed in a certain way due to Invader Zim falling in with the rest of what was happening in the world. So one day, Jaunen Vasquez was approached about the character Dib, and it was requested that he changed the appearance of Dib because it was putting people off about him wearing a long coat since Columbine happened. Now, I will be dropping a lot of things about the definitions of that event, so if it's not comfortable for you, I have made a time code just to skip ahead. So, Jaunen Vasquez said no. When I first read that, I was like, you're kidding me, right? That is one of the most horrific tragedies ever. When I heard about that in high school and got the whole story, I was sobbing like, I miss my friends, and now suddenly my mom. And, it makes you think about the way that we have to alter media to be careful to tragic events. And we've been doing that a long time, but Zim was one of those that came under the fire in a quiet way. And when you hear someone say, no, I'm not changing my character because of a tragic event, it can come off a certain way, like it did to me. I stood away from the show for a while because I was like, wow, audacity. But then I talked about this with my friends and explained the whole thing. My friend Ams, who is a listener on the show, made a very good point about what Jaunen Vasquez had in his setup that made it hard for him to accommodate the change of Dib. Jaunen Vasquez, has made a very expensive television show, and Ams had pointed out that if he had to change Dib, that means a lot of money was probably about to go down the drain for everyone that had already animated Dib with the trench coat, and then you have to do redesigns. Like, it's a tall order for what appeared to be a harmless request for the comfort of other viewers. But then there's this. Jaunen Vasquez defended Dib that he shouldn't be looked upon for having a trench coat that all of a sudden makes him a school shooter. Dib is a stupid character with a stupid arch nemesis. He is extremely harmless. Nothing bad would ever happen from Dib. And it's ironic too because he's the one trying to stop the danger and he's being looked upon as is the danger. And I like that Jaunen Vasquez refused in order to move forward with life. If we don't look at the things that make us uncomfortable and find a different association, then we don't move on. That probably ultimately wasn't his intention, but that's the way I see it. We've come a long way to know what triggers us in the media and what we can walk away from or what we can change. And he did make the right choice because everybody loves Dib. There's nothing wrong with his character. Protecting him was the right call. But also, Jaunen Vasquez did not say no maliciously or just, rub it in the faces, because clearly that is a horrific event that was brought to his attention to accommodate in his show. He was polite and having to refuse that request. Doesn't look good, but he didn't make himself look worse. He just handled it the best way that he could. No one ever plans for, an event like that to happen and having to accommodate, and we do the best we can, and so did he. So clearly, there's a story that's been brought to life and very defended, but then there's the voice cast that made it just pretty much permanently quotable for the rest of time. So if there's one thing that I love about animation, it is the voice cast. This is one of the most perfectly chaotic voices that I've heard in quite some time. Now, there's kind of a rule that you kind of hear is that not everyone can be the same character, but since this is a loud environment where all of the characters are loud, everyone is uniquely loud where it's complementative of the environment being chaotic. So it's glad that there's no one here that's not afraid to be a little loud. And that's why my first guy I'm talking about is the one who is the purest voice that we could ever ask for purest chaos, Richard Stephen Horvitz, who I have talked about before on the show, who's the voice of Billy from Billy and Mandy. And I mean, with the way this guy sounds, it's hard not to miss him. You could throw a dart and you will have found a character that he has voiced. But his voice has gotten him into trouble. Some major decibel trouble. So this is my favorite piece of trivia to share. In the recording rooms for all of the shows from any variant of Nickelodeon, Teen Nick, Nick Jr., major Nickelodeon episodes, Invader Zim's recording room was right next to Dora the Explorer. And Richard Stephen Horvitz's voice would be so decibly loud that it would interrupt Dora's recording. So meanwhile, I hear Swiper. Zim is yelling somewhere, fucking up a take. And that gives me a little bit of life back every time I have to say that. There was complaints coming from the Dora recording room like non-stop. Can you imagine that? A show that teenagers loved was pissing off a show for preschoolers that was about keeping calm and figuring things out, stupidly trying to figure things out in such a dumb way that there's such a hostility coming from that room. It just gives you a little bit more life back. The way Richard Stephen Horvitz brings Zim to life, it is a miracle and a wonder and a scientific concern if that voice is powerful than we think it is. I am convinced that he can probably have that voice power up 3 countries and probably all of our cell phones. It is just that powerful. This guy does such a good job playing the most comedically annoying character that never gets old. There are some people that have a gift about what they can do and they have a niche that works, and this is his. It has been a joy getting to see this actor still pop up even in other projects right now. A lot of people know him from the show Hell of a Boss with Brandon Rogers, where he has guest starred onto a lot of skits. And getting to see that he's in projects that's appropriate to the kind of characters that he loves, it speaks a lot about a person and what their love of acting is. It's beautiful to see. But then there's my other favorite thing that I found out, and that is with Ricky Simons, who is the voice of Grr. He was also the colorist for Invader Zim, and then made a voice that has now gone down in history as the most cutest introduction to destruction. Not many people know this, and I had such a concerned joy having to share this with my friends. So there's a reoccurring gag with Gerd that he will drink something and then cough uncontrollably. So Ricky Simons has asthma. So whenever he does the drinking and then coughs, that is a asthmatic man trying to get his breath back. We're listening to Gerd having an asthma problem. That is what we hear every time. When I tell my friends the look of shock and awe on their faces, realizing that's what they're listening to, it's the weirdest, interesting thing I have to share with people. But then, there's John Vasquez himself, who has also played a couple of roles in his own show. Like, this guy has way too many hats, and they're all great, and I don't know how he does it. But he's voiced a couple of characters between the computer, Brian, Nick, cyborgs, various characters. Honestly, everybody on the show does multiple characters, and you can definitely hear how they're altering their voices to get away with having a little cast where you see a whole bunch of characters. Like, everyone gave 110% into every department. So for this thing only to get 2 seasons because someone else didn't like how this was angled differently, it's a little pissy, even though it still is admirable in its quality to know how much this was. They literally had quantity and quality at the same time. Despite the show being canceled, there was absolutely no way that it was going to be forgotten. Hot Topic saw this and ran with it for years. It pops up onto lists all the time for top 10 canceled cartoons, top 10 cartoons canceled too soon, top 10 beloved cartoons of the 2000s, and usually Zim is the thumbnail on a majority of those lists. And eventually, Zim got his own convention called Invader Con. A majority of the cast shows up, of course Vasquez shows up, and the fans pour into this convention year after year, thus making Zim this icon that's just never going to go away. Which is, again, hilarious. It's a character that never achieved anything, yet on the outside of it all, Invader Zim, the show, ended up becoming successful in its own way, with its own mission accomplished. And eventually, Invader Zim got to be an influencer than the influencee. And one of those things was an anime called Panty and Stocking, which also, unfortunately, had a short-lived run, but eventually got its own revival. And on the show, there's a character named Chuck that is, without a doubt, inspired by Gurr. You can't not have a little green dog and not think that Gurr has some form of inspiration behind that, and it's just a beautiful little millennial Easter egg. The anime Panty and Stocking is highly recommended. It is some of the best writing and some of the best references, and the fact that one of their own characters is a flat-out reference to Invader Zim, that is pretty cool. Another show that Invader Zim had an inadvertent help with influencing was Steven Universe. Because, you can't have wholesomeness without chaos, and they are the perfect kind of chaos. It's like its own diet version of Invader Zim. And it's kind of sweet to know that this show hit everyone, and you can tell how Invader Zim has been interpreted. There's a welcome to chaos. There's a hand that can go to some of the most zaniest Tom and Jerry shit that you can get away with. And, both of those blends work perfectly. It made an impact on the people that love the show and carry it on. So I don't think Invader Zim is going anywhere anytime soon. So I guess for my ending notes on Invader Zim, I didn't really make any. But this is what I always end up coming back to. You either like Invader Zim or you don't, and that's perfectly okay. This is one of those shows that doesn't make you feel bad if it's not your vibe. This is specifically made for people that like that chaos, but this isn't shoved into someone's face if they don't like it. When I asked a lot of my friends if they grew up with Invader Zim, a lot of them were very honest to say that it turned them off and it really wasn't speaking to them. And that's okay, because it was meant to speak to those that do want to ingest that kind of chaos, and it will reach that kind of audience that it's going to go to. This isn't a series that's trying to grasp for everybody. It knew how to find a specific audience, and everyone could conglomerate to it. But that also speaks volumes about its creator that made something 25 years ago at 22 years old, not knowing what was going to happen, and then let the dice roll. And now there's all these characters that are so chaotic and violent, and they're the most loved things by millennials. It's a little funny the way you look at the way this thing is aged. No matter what, something so small will always find a way. This was a little part of Nickelodeon that nobody wanted, not even Nickelodeon itself. And now it's become beloved by so many people and new fans. And even people that weren't the biggest fans of it have come to respect it. And that's a nice full circle moment. And that is going to be a wrap on the Invader Zim episode. I hope that everyone enjoyed this episode and got the most out of it. It was a part of history that I have always seen, so it's been kind of cool to be able to get to recite all of that. It's one way I can show my millennialness, I guess. So I have some news about what will happen for August on the Screen Queen, but before I get into that, I have an important highlight that I need to make. So I caught some news about a local author in my state of Virginia named Travis Savart. I've gotten the chance to meet him a couple times at conventions. He is a wholesomely amazing dude. He writes some awesome books. He hosts a show called Write Night. He is very inspirational. Every time I think about what I'm doing, I know that he's out there doing the same thing I'm doing. And he has come down with a heart condition that has made it hard to work, and the bills are increasing. So he has several forms of donations, and he is not asking for mountains and mountains of dollars for whatever can be donated. But if there is any way to donate to his cause, I will have his links in my description so everyone can pass it along. If you can donate, great. If not, then like I said, we'll just keep it passed along so Travis can get some help. So anyway, now is the time to find out what's going to happen for August on the Screen Queen. So most of the mainstayers on this show know that August is an alliteration themed month. The first time was Anime August, and last year was Anniversary August. So this year it's going to be Action August. And if there's one thing I love more than animation, it is the action genre. But this year, I will not be using the lotto system for this event. I have picked out 4 films that aren't exactly more special than the other, but you'll see why I picked them. But I will be giving hints about what the next episode is going to be. With all of that mentioned, here are your hints about what the first episode is going to be for Action August. It came out in 1993. It's a remake, and it takes place in Chicago. And if you think you know what it is, then you're going to be looking forward to a really cool episode for the first episode of Action August. But until then, thank you so much for listening. If you want to catch up with me in between uploads, you can find me on my Instagram at the Queen of the Screen. I recently just put out a new short based off of one of the earlier episodes of the Screen Queen, and it is made so wonderfully by my wonderful friend Miriam, and it is going to be thumbnailed on my page, so please go check it out. And if you're looking for an easier way to listen to your Media Queen, I am also available on YouTube. I try to get that to everybody who's trying to find a place to listen to me on the internet, and here you go. And lastly, I always like to advertise my book series that I go on and on about. If you are interested in a gritty, crime, bizarrely written series that has a bit of a chaoticness just like Invader Zim, then please check out my series Inglorious Inc. You can find it on Amazon, and the link is in the description box. And I am officially losing steam, so I gotta sign off. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!